Welcome to Wherever I Lay My Hat, a podcast about home. Today's guest is Melodie Jacquinot, and I'm hoping I pronounced that correctly, but I probably didn't, who is a French-Swiss Kiwi. She was born in Switzerland, studied in the UK, and has spent the last 9 years in New Zealand. She has a lovely partner and 2 cats, and she tells me she would have more, but her landlord has 2 as a maximum in her contract. She loves traveling, reading, building Lego, watching TV shows, exploring the Auckland region with walks, and buying more quirky lamps and handbags than she can store. Welcome, Melodie, and I hope I didn't butcher your last name too much. My French is a little out of date. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey and sort of how you ended up in New Zealand?
Thanks, Daniel. Yes. So I literally, it was a very random way that I ended up in New Zealand. Um, when I studied back in the UK, I had a good friend called Alban, and we sort of kept in touch like very sporadically. Like, it's part of those people that you might not talk to them for years, but then you run into them and it's like you've never left each other. And I was sending him like a Happy New Year sort of message, and then he just sort of reached out and was like 2 months later, like, "Oh, Happy New Year!" And I'm like, "Okay." And he was like, "Oh, I'm in New Zealand. It's amazing. Like, I'm doing a working holiday visa. Like, you should totally come." And I was I was going through my crisis of 25 of like, what am I doing with my life? This is not what I thought it would be and all that. And pretty much just thought like, yeah, actually, I totally should. I should just go to New Zealand. So I started like thinking about it, and he was like, "Oh, when you've got like a French passport, it's really easy. Like you can do it online." And so I did that. It took me like 4 days or something, and then bam, I just had a working holiday visa, and I was like, "Wow, this is crazy."
Yeah, I think New
And
Zealand bureaucracy certainly a few years ago was a little different. I remember when I did my working holiday visa and I sent the application form in and forgot to put the passport in the envelope. And I can imagine if like the British or the American embassies got that, they'd just be like sending it back. I got a phone call from the guy at the New Zealand embassy in Haymarket, or consulate as it was, and said, "Hey, can you pop down and bring your passport so I can put the stamp in it?" I can't imagine many other countries handling it that way.
my goodness, no. Yeah, it was it's pretty chill back then. And then yeah, so I just sort of like decided, okay, let's do this. And I thought, okay, I was doing like a lot of I had like been doing internship for 2.5 years in different places. It was just going nowhere. But the current bosses I have back then, they were really cool. And I sort of tell them this is what I want to do, and they're like, great. And they sort of adapted like my contract. They even told me like, oh, if you want to still work remote for us to like help you settle, like that was very lovely. I had to tell my parents, obviously. I mean, I had moved to live back with them, and I always remember because my mom said she's like, oh, this is very exciting, but like, she was a bit sad, and I was like, oh, what's going on? And she was like, well, you're gonna meet a Kiwi, you're gonna get married, you're gonna have a baby, I'm never gonna see you again. And I'm like 25 thinking like, just going on a holiday.
Yeah.
Like, it's okay. I'll be back. And here I am 9 years later, like still in New Zealand. So I guess she's not too wrong. um
It seems to be
yeah.
quite that way with people. I was meant to go for a year and end up there for 20, nearly 23. So yeah, I think it
It
tends to be
definitely
that
feels
way.
that way.
So going
A lot
back a
of
little
friends,
bit,
that's what I heard.
so you are French but grew up in Switzerland. Tell me a little bit sort of about
Yes.
your that background as well.
Yeah, so both my parents are French, so
Hmm.
that just makes me French.
Hmm.
And then but they both sort of lived and worked close to Geneva,
Hmm.
and I was born there. And but Switzerland is not a country where if you're born there you automatically like
No.
got the nationality. It's more it's a bit more complex. You either marry a Swiss, or you have to have your parents to be Swiss or to have been born in Switzerland. And back then it might have changed, but back then it was like you had to, when you reached 13 years of after you being born there and having lived there this whole time, you could apply to become Swiss.
Hmm.
Um, which I didn't really know back then. I didn't really care, to be honest, because it didn't really affect me in any way. But then, like when I was 16, my mum was like, "Oh, you should probably do it. Like it'd be good, for you to have like the Swiss passport." And I already felt Swiss as well, like because that's where I've always grew up. So yeah, I had to do that, which was quite the adventure in itself. Back then they really checked like if you were, I guess, integrated, like, did you have friends? Like, did you, as a 16-year-old, I guess as an adult, it would be a very different sort of approach, but that's what they keyed. And then they'd ask you a question. I remember we had to go to like the police station. And they had some questions as well, which was so random. And I remember the policeman he was quite something. And he was like, he asked me like, "Oh, why is there like a different part of Switzerland, like why is there like their flag or whatever on this castle?" And I'm like, I have no idea, because despite being like living in Switzerland and stuff, I've actually went to a French school, so I was in the French school system.
Okay.
So I wasn't learning about like Switzerland's like history or anything, because I was doing the French one,
So did
which they
you
weren't a fan of.
so did you cross the border each day to go to France to school, or was it a
Oh, so
French
it was a
school in
French
Switzerland?
school in Geneva. Geneva is quite like an international city. Like it's got
Hmm.
like the UN and all those different things. So it's actually got like a lot of like a few international schools and stuff. And there was this school that was like, I say French school, but it was like they were doing the French school system. So for you to get your French baccalaureate at the end,
Sure.
but they also did like the equivalent in Switzerland, which is the maturité. So you could choose. But my parents were like, "Well, you're French, like you should learn, French history." And also back then, like having a French baccalaureate would open like doors to like university, because it was sort of
Mhm.
recognized, whereas the Swiss equivalent wasn't quite there yet. Or sometimes, like for example, if I wanted to come to New Zealand on my Swiss passport, it would have been a whole lot more complicated, which I thought was quite weird. I was like,
Yeah,
okay.
because Switzerland's not generally part of most kind of treaties or agreements because it's so independent. So you wouldn't have that reciprocal visa stuff
Yes,
that a lot of other countries would have.
exactly, exactly. So it was like it was interesting. So yeah, so that's sort of how I ended up becoming Swiss. And then yeah, moved to New Zealand. And then so I moved in with my friend who was staying near, which was really cool for a bit. And then he was also doing his residency, so he was telling me all about that. And then
Mhm.
I think I went to like a work visa after
Mhm.
the working holiday, and then which was never a holiday, it just was work.
Right.
It just turned into work the whole time. Because I also
Yeah.
had the brilliant idea of coming here in the middle of winter, because
Yeah.
my dumb ass didn't think about the
So you
difference.
went from winter to winter rather than from yeah, because you kind of
Yes,
pick
I was like,
one or
oh
the
yeah,
other,
let's
right?
go
You either
on
do two
holiday.
summers in a row or two winters in a row.
Yeah, I really didn't think that through. I was like, oh my God. Like, I was like, well, I'm definitely not going to go and explore stuff right now. It's not the best sort of time. So I ended up into like, yeah, like a job and then a job and stuff. And then did some, yeah, work visa. And eventually I was like, let's just do like, yeah, like my residency as well, because I was like, I might as well, right? Because it's
Mhm.
just I didn't like the idea of like me being able to stay in New Zealand was related to my job, because I was
Yeah.
like, if anything goes wrong, like it's not great. So
Mhm.
and eventually I ended with just going through the whole like let's do citizenship.
Mhm.
So here I am.
So you have the three. So you've got
I've got
French,
3
Swiss.
passports now,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm like, "What is this?" I'm, like, collecting them now. It's like, I think that's
Yeah.
enough.
Yeah. And so there's
Yeah.
no. I know some countries are have rules around, and New Zealand doesn't care. But so Switzerland and France don't care that you have other passports either.
Mm, yeah. It's interesting, that's something that comes up a lot, 'cause, absolutely, like, certain countries, they're really not keen on you have like, they
Mhm.
don't let you, it's like you have to give up
Yeah.
your citizenship to take another one, and I remember being really worried about that when I was doing the whole, like, Swiss passport, because I was like, "Well, I don't wanna lose the French one," like, it's quite handy to have both, but, like, no, they did not care, it's like it's fine, and I've been using, like, interestingly, depending where I'd go, I'd choose a passport or the other because it's like, yeah, depending where you go, sometimes, like, that one country has beef with them, and you're like, "Okay, I'm this nationality now." But it's been like, they've been quite similar, but, like, um, I guess because the French one was part of the, European Union, so it was quite good for certain things, though to be fair, Switzerland has, like, sort of when you travel around Europe, there's always, like, European Union passport plus Switzerland plus Norway, so it's usually, like, it's fine.
Mhm. Which I
But yeah.
lost when the UK dropped out because I've got a UK and New Zealand passport,
Oh, yeah.
and I lost that obviously when the UK dropped out of the EU. I don't get to go through the fast checks anymore, which is interesting. You mentioned you
Oh.
studied in the UK. How did you make that decision to go from Switzerland, doing the French school system, to go and study in the UK? And I'm assuming that was for your university degree.
Yes, absolutely. I was like, when you reach that age and you're like, okay, so I'm gonna be 18, I'm gonna finish school, what am I gonna do? And I'm like, why do we have to choose our entire life at this age? It feels so crazy
Yep.
because I'm like, I know nothing. Like, I don't know. I know roughly what I like and what I don't like based off like stuff at school. Like,
Mhm.
okay, I'm really not good at like chemistry, so definitely not gonna go down that way.
Yeah.
I like languages, okay. But like, yeah, and I remember being like, I don't really know what I want to do. And I had a really lovely English teacher, and she would always like, oh, like, they've got like really good university in the UK, like, you should check it out and stuff. And I guess I was looking around, like, I was looking at France, I was looking at like different sort of countries around and what's to offer. I look at the US, but I was like, I can't afford that. I was like, it's just not planned for that. And then, yeah, I looked at the UK and I was like, actually, I always really loved, I guess, the culture and everything. And I was like, oh, wouldn't that be nice to sort of continue and do something? And I thought, well, I've learned English since I was like 4,
Mhm.
because my mum worked in a job where it was like bilingual, and so she was
Mhm.
always like, it's super important for you to learn English, which I'm like so thankful for now because I'm like, yeah, that just made it so much easier. And like, I remember thinking like, well, that would be a really great way to really take it to the next level and just like, yeah, do all that stuff. So I was like, okay, I'll just go. And I looked and I remember there was like this whole system, it was like called UCAS or something. I can't remember like
Mhm.
exactly, but it's like this whole
I remember
system you have to
UCAS.
apply. And I was
Yep.
like, oh, this looks so complex. But like this English teacher was so amazing. She really like helped me out, and like we went and did we go and visit? No, I think we just went and visit like one of them or something. But like I had like 5 in there, and I was like, okay, I'll just apply and stuff. And it was really based on like the courses they had, not really the location, because I really didn't
Yep.
care where I was ending up. It was more like, what do you have to offer? And I was looking at like doing communications because it was wide enough that I felt like I'll find something in there that I like eventually. And so I ended up going to Oxford Brookes,
Yep.
which was like such a fun university, and really like it was like a cool, it was like, what is it called, like communication, media and culture, like
Mhm.
anyway, it was a bit of everything. It was just like sort of, yeah, getting you into that. So I was like, okay, I'll do like a bachelor there, and that was like 3 years there, and I
Mhm.
really really loved it. Like that was such a cool place. um and then after that I was like, okay, I want to I've sort of touched a bit on everything, but I really like advertising.
Mhm.
And I was like, I'd really like to go deeper into this. And so I found like a master that was in Edinburgh, and I
Okay.
was like, oh my god. I mean, I was really biased because I really liked Edinburgh
Edinburgh's a
like
beautiful city.
already.
It's a really beautiful
So
city.
I was like, okay, I'm so keen to go. And they had like this master, it was like called creative advertising, and it was pretty much teaching you around like to be like a copywriter or like a designer and sort of like everything in between. And that was just 1 year. but it was so good and I really loved it. I think what made it extra special is that you had people from all over. So you had like people from obviously Edinburgh, um, Glasgow, and then you had like a few people from Greece. We had some people from Lithuania. We had one girl from America, another one from Germany. Like it was a really like sort of like mixed group, and it
Hmm.
just made it really really cool. And there was like all sorts of skills because we were all at sort of different level. Like for
Hmm.
me, I knew nothing about like designing, so I was like, what is InDesign? How do I do all this? But you had people who've been doing this forever, but it was like it was so much fun. So yeah, I would have totally stayed in the UK to be honest. Like I loved it so much there, but every sort of internship that I found after was like non-paid. And I'm like,
Yeah.
well, I don't have family here, so I can't really just live at my parents and do this
Fair.
job for free. So yeah, so that's why I went back to Switzerland after. But I think I would
Mhm.
have totally, if I had an opportunity, that probably would have been a place I would have ended up calling home for a long time.
So touching on that, obviously you grew up in Switzerland. You spent 3 years in the UK, and now you spent nine in New Zealand. Is there one place that feels more like home? Is there a place that calls home to you? How does that kind of? I'm always interested to hear that from people who lived in multiple places and perhaps live away from their family as well. So, kind of what I suppose the first question for that is kind of what feels the most to home to you?
It's it's still like Switzerland and
Hmm.
like my parents' house and being with them there. I guess that's because I spend the most time there, but also I guess it's like the childhood home,
Hmm.
like because we moved into that house when I was 4. So
Okay.
I've literally like, and they're still in the same house. So it's like, it's always been that sort of like one place. And I have like, I think also so many like memories and like good times and all that. And it really feels like this is home. And like when people like, when I travel back
Hmm.
to visit or whatever, I'm always like, I'm going home. Like, it's like, it's really like, it really feels like the ultimate sort of home place. I think the UK was like it definitely was my home for quite a bit, but it's always gonna be like the one that could have been. I know it sounds really
Hmm.
weird, but it's
Yeah.
like I
No.
always had like this sort of connection to it. Well, every time we've traveled back, because my partner, his brother lived in the UK for a bit, so we also went and visited and stuff like that. And I always, every time I go back, I'm like, I could totally live here. Like this, there's always a part of it that feels like home,
Sure.
in that way. And then I think New Zealand for me is like it's the new home that I'm making for
Hmm.
myself, with my partner. Um, but it feels like home in a different way. It's like this is where I am right now, and this is where I am, like, yeah, where I live, where I work, and all that. But it doesn't feel to the same sort of level of back home in
Okay.
Switzerland. I don't know how to explain
No,
it. Yeah.
I do get that. Do you think that is something that would change over time, or do you think that Switzerland will always have that pull?
I think it's always gonna have that sort of like, yeah, that sort of vibe. To be
Hmm.
fair though, like my parents were thinking of selling the house at one point, and I was
Hmm.
like, because I was like, oh my god, like I don't know, I never imagined. It sounds so silly to say that, but I was like, I never imagined they would ever sell the house and move away, and I was like, well, that is totally a possibility, and it felt like I was like, oh my god, no, like I can't not, like I was like, it'd be so weird for me to go back home and not be in the house because for me I
Hmm.
was like, it is part of home, so maybe when this happens, it would feel different, and I'll be like, "Oh, it's not quite home anymore. It's not the same vibe." Yeah.
I can actually empathise with that because I remember my parents had the same house from when I was probably about 10 years old until I left for New Zealand. So I was 22, 23, and then a fair few years after I left. And I remember the first time I went back to visit after they sold that house. And it did feel not in a negative way in any way, but a little bit like that safety net was removed because your bedroom wasn't
Yeah.
there anymore. The people, the familiarity of where you were wasn't. Now, my parents moved to a completely different city in England. They went from Croydon to Dover, or just outside of Dover, and so totally different. And so there was no familiarity when I went back there. It was all new, like nothing was the same.
Mm.
And I think there is that, home, and this is something that's come up in a few of these now. That home is as much, it's people, but it's also comfort, and familiarity, I
Yeah.
think. And I think that when that familiarity goes, and especially now my parents don't live in the UK, the UK of all the places I live now feels the least like home in terms of where I'd want to be, but it will always be home because that's where I was born. That's where I grew up.
Yeah.
And I still support, I say this on every episode. I still support the English football team. I still support Chelsea. I support the English cricket team. I still have that feeling of home, and I don't think that will ever change. But it doesn't have any pull for me anymore. Like I can't imagine ever going back to live there because my parents aren't there. My childhood home isn't there. That
Yeah.
whole, and it's been a really long time. It's been 23, 24 years since I've lived there. So that kind of familiar pull has gone. Could you
Mm.
see ever moving back to live in Switzerland, or do you feel like New Zealand is now home for obviously home for the foreseeable? But is there that pull to go home?
Not Not really. I've realized, I guess after moving here, I've realized something. I mean, I've been very lucky in that my parents love traveling and
Mm-hmm.
we've always traveled a lot. And so, and I loved like discovering new countries, new culture and all that. Like it's so much fun. But then obviously like traveling and living somewhere is quite different.
Oh yeah.
And it's been like when I came here at first, it was really like a travel thing. So I was
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, blah blah blah. And then obviously now, like 9 years later, I'm like, well, obviously I'm there. And I have friends who ask me, it's like, oh, like that friend like Alvin who made me move here eventually. He ended up leaving and going back home. Um and he's always asking, he's like, oh, like, like, are you gonna stay? And I'm like, well, for now I'm quite happy here. So I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
it kind of makes sense. But yeah, I don't know if I would go back to Switzerland, to be fair. Like, I do love it, and I still have very good friends that from back at school that I'm still in touch. That we have a little group chat that we just talk every day, and it's like, we're still like very close and stuff. So I would love to be closer to them so I could see them in person and
Mm-hmm.
stuff. But then I'm also like, I don't know if there would be like jobs for me there. Like I remember really struggling back then because a big part of like being in Switzerland, and it's like 4 languages in that country, that just makes it really hard, is they sort of expect you to always have German, which I did at school. So I was as a third language, and I was like, yeah. But like I left, and I've never practiced my German since I was 18. So I'm like, it is sort of long gone, right? There's like little residue
Yeah.
somewhere in my brain, but I'm like, let's be real, it wouldn't be easy. And I'm like, there's a bit of part of me that's like, oh, I don't even know if I could, go back into this. And I don't know. There's a part of me as well when I go back home. I love it now, but as a holiday place. And I'm like, I
Sure.
don't know if I would feel like I want to live there.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it yeah, it's hard, I guess. It's like I guess I see like both good sides on here and there, and there's different things that sort of appeal. Like, I feel like potentially, but I'm also like now after living here, I've also realized that I quite like moving around as well. So I'm like, who knows? Maybe I'll find another country that I'm gonna go and end up living in. It's like I don't know. I'm really not fussy. Um, I guess the language probably would be a barrier for me if I'd have to go somewhere else because now I'm too lazy to learn a new language. Like I'm like my brain can barely
You're
handle
still
the
a
two language
long
that I
way
have
ahead
to
of
learn.
most people. The fact that you speak English and French is still a long way ahead of most people.
Oh,
So
I don't even feel like I speak any of them like well anymore, you know, it's like a whole mumble of both languages now, and it's like, "What happened?" But yeah, it's, so I think there's that, but I completely relate to what you said about, like, the safety place, because I
Mhm.
think that is definitely what's happening with that, house, and, like, being like, "This is the place, this is, like, the memory," like, even, like, I found myself being nostalgic recently because, when I was a kid, I used to go, and stay with my great aunt and great uncle, and they had like a house in the middle of nowhere in the countryside in France. And I had spent some really lovely summer there, and it's like it was really lost, but I also live back in a
Mhm.
village back home, so I like being in the middle of nowhere. That's like
Sure.
my thing. I was like, I love it. But it was like I just thought about it the other day, and I sent my mom a text, and I was like, "Can you, like, send me the address of this place? I wanna go on Google Maps." I was like, "I wanna have a look at it again." Like, I was like, I'm starting, like, feeling nostalgic because it was like, again, it was that home, like, the
Mhm.
what they made it to be, that it was this very, like, tight, um, like, no care in the world, like, everyone walking around, like, bare feet, like, you know, we were
Mhm.
playing in the garden. It had this really family vibe, like, summer, like, having, like, laughters and stuff, and I was like, I guess this is what is also making home for me. It's that
Mhm.
sort of, like, yeah, those feelings attached to the place.
So would you say that's what makes something home for you more? It's the emotion and the feeling of it rather than the physicality?
I think so, yes. I think, like, right now I'm like, so we're renting where we are
Mhm.
'cause, buying a house in New Zealand is like
Yeah, Auckland is for those people who aren't from New Zealand listening to this, Auckland prices are insane. It's incredibly unaffordable.
it's ridiculous. Or it's like so much money for, like, a really shitty looking house, and you're like, "Why do I wanna spend that much on that?" Like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not something I'm really considering. I mean, that would be the dream, is, like, to find your own place, to be able to afford your own place, to make it your home, to be able to
Mhm.
do what you want with it. I'm very lucky in that we have, like, absolutely adorable landlord, which makes it easier,
Mhm.
and, like, we've really made this house, because now we've been in this house for, like, what, 7 years or something, like,
Right.
it's been a while. So
Which is
we're
a
really,
long
like,
time for a rental, which is impressive for a
yeah,
rental.
it's honestly, it's been great. Like, we have, like, no complaint. It's, like, really well located, and we've been, yeah, we've been really happy with it. We've made it, like, sort of to the levels that we can,
Mhm.
obviously, when you're renting. But it's like, I guess that's the thing. I'm like, maybe what would make it even more home would be that if it was my own home and I could really go, like, harder at making it that way. But to be fair, it does feel really like home to me here, because I'm
Mhm.
like, it's been so many years. Like, we've got a like we spent lockdown in here as well. So we were like, you know, it's like, oh my god, we spent so much time stuck in this house. But I'm someone that also likes to stay at home. So for me, I was like, I don't mind it. This was great. But yeah.
I always think of that renting versus owning thing, and there's a cultural thing. I think Anglo countries, New Zealand, the UK, the US, home ownership is a big thing, right? That is what you do. And I know,
Mm,
speaking to people from France, people from Germany, it's less of a thing. Like, people still own, but renting for life is much more of a thing in other European countries than it is here. But I always kind of think of it as like a potted plant versus a tree. Like, when you're renting, even if it's a big pot, you're still a potted plant. You can't quite get your roots into the
yes.
ground because
Yes.
you can be moved at any time. Whereas when you own, you have that ability to drive your roots in and really kind of make it your own and feel at home, become one with the place you're in. And I think that that does affect your ability to feel at home. You know, we're in a similar situation here. Like, I owned my place in New Zealand before I moved here, but I owned that before I got together with my wife now. So it was my place. So she never felt completely at home there because
Yeah.
that always to her felt like my place. Here, because of like having just moved here and all the other things, and if you ever try and get a credit rating in America, you'll understand how difficult that process can be. We don't own, we rent at the moment. And that, we have a nice place to rent. It's a good place. Our daughter's here, but you don't have that connection with the place because at some point, we have a lease that runs till July of next year, but we know that at that point they can just say, well, see you later. You know, even if you've been there a
Yes.
long time, you
Yeah.
don't have that permanence. And I think permanence, and just touching on what you said about emotion, home is always going to be where you feel comfortable, where you feel safe, where the people around you make you feel comfortable and at home.
Yes.
But there is also, you kind of, in my belief, you need to feel a little bit of sense of permanence. You know, that I am the master of my own destiny, right? I get to choose where I live, where I go, what I do. And I think when you're renting, sometimes you can lose that because you know
Yeah.
you're always
Yeah.
slightly at the whim of someone else.
Absolutely. Yes, I agree. I don't think I've ever really thought about it that way, but it's so true. Like now that you say it, I'm like, yeah, that's probably why it doesn't feel as much as a home.
Mhm.
But it's like, yeah, is that sort of sense of like, oh, we could go any movement. So one part of it is freeing because you're like, I could go any movement. If I don't like it, I could just go, whatever. But another part is also like, yeah, but what if suddenly they change their mind and they decided they want to sell the house or like what do we what do you do? And there is a part like that and it's like yeah, it's definitely something that you sort of have in the back of your of your head. 100%.
And so, sort of the last kind of little topic I just wanted to talk about a little bit, and I like to ask this from expats a lot who move somewhere where there's no family, um, because I think there's that there's an old adage, right, that you can choose your friends but not your family. But I think that when you're an expat somewhere, you kind of do choose your family because those friendships become family. So really
Yeah.
interested to understand kind of how that's been for you, and is that something you've done? And this is a really interesting one I like to ask Kiwis as well a little bit. Is that have you found friends that are expats, that are people from similar places to you? Have you kind of got lots of New Zealand friends? How have you built that sort of family network around yourself?
I guess when I started because I stayed with that friend, he sort of introduced me to a lot of other expats as well. So initially it was a lot of there's a lot of French people, which I was like, I don't want to be around French people. I want to be like practicing my English. Like I was like, this is counterintuitive. But like, yeah, it was great though because we would go and do like I guess like the first year, yeah, we did a lot of exploring and stuff on
Mhm.
the weekend and we were all like, oh, we're new to the country, let's go everywhere, and it was great. um After that I guess you get like friends at work, so that was also a way of like meeting new people. I always end up, and I don't know if it's because it's Auckland and it's so multicultural, but like I
Mhm.
always end up with a lot of people from different countries,
Mhm.
like that I worked with. So that was also, which I love. So I was like, it was really awesome to be able to yeah, get to know all those people in different sort of workplace. um a lot of the people over the years, what I've noticed is they left.
Mhm.
So there's also that whole wave of like people will stay for a few years and eventually like they sort of go. So sadly like sort of lost touch with a few people or
Mhm.
like make it a bit harder, but yeah, there's that. And then when I met my partner, I met him at work actually. And it was like I got to meet all his friends, and most of his friends like he'd know them since like school, like it's been years that they know each other. And they really became like a family because they're such a big group. And I remember like when we had like Christmas and things like that, like, we'd have like Christmas together, which for me, I was like, I've never had Christmas with my friends back home. That was just not a thing we do.
Yeah.
You just have Christmas with your family. So it was sort of a new thing for me. And I was like, oh, I like this. This is nice. And so that was lovely. And even before I met my partner and all that, when I had a really lovely flatmate that I lived with for like a few years, and she really made me feel like welcome and like part of it, because like same, like we had like Christmas together like with some of her other friends, like we were always like, yeah, like a like it felt like we were like you said, like a family. Like her parents came to visit. I got to meet her parents. Like when my parents came over, we also go and like, go for dinner and stuff. Like it really felt that way. And so I guess like absolutely, like you end up having the people around you like become your family. um but at the same time, it's like um I still I don't have like a friendship quite like the one that I have back home.
Okay,
It's like
interesting.
it's a different type of friendship, like
Mhm.
in I guess we went through through school and all the drama and
Mhm.
stuff, like with my friends back home, and it's like we're probably more open on certain things, but I'd say it's different type of friendship. Um but then again, we're doing things that, yeah, I wouldn't have done with my friends back home as well. So it's like, yeah, I like it because I feel like it forced me also to do things differently, to sort of try new things, and to sort of yeah, to sort of appreciate even people even more, I think. Because suddenly you're like, okay, I'm out there. I have to, you have to, you're like, I'm going to meet people. I don't really know anyone. So it was really great that I had that friend initially, because
Yeah.
let's be honest, I think if I was here on my own, I didn't know anyone, I probably would have been a bit shy and be like, oh, I don't know how to like meet
Oh, it makes it
anyone.
really hard when you don't have that. I'm very lucky that I've moved here with my wife and she's got friends and family. In New Zealand, I moved with a partner, which made that easier. But it is a really difficult transition when you don't know many people. And especially, I think, as
Yes.
you get older, because, when
Oh
you're
my
young,
God, yes.
as you get older, it becomes much, much harder to make friends because we don't, you don't go out to bars that much anymore. You don't play as much
It's like,
sport. You
where do
don't,
you go?
yeah. So, like, it's there isn't really that kind of opportunity that you get when you're in your teens or your early 20s, when you get to kind of do those things that kind of make new friends. And I think that's why those friendships you make early or in childhood become so important, because they are something that's
Yes.
persevered for a really long time. So yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. Thank you so much for your time, Melody. I've
No,
really, really
thank
enjoyed our
you.
chat. It was really good. So thank you so much. It's really very much appreciated. And to everyone else, thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode, whichever format you've chosen to do that on. If you enjoyed the show, please, if you're on YouTube, like and subscribe. And that really, really helps spread the reach of the show. Again, if it's on Apple Podcasts, please leave a review, Spotify, Amazon, comment, all the usual things that every podcast host asks you to do for their podcast. Would be great if you could do that. And as usual, we'd love to hear from you. So if you think you've got a story to tell and you would like to be a guest, this is a podcast about people and the stories that I think everybody has. Even if you've never really moved anywhere, you still have a story and a feeling about home. So please reach out. Dan at whereverIlayMyhat.com is my email address. So please reach out. And if you'd like to be on the show, we can have a conversation. So again, thank you for listening, and I'll speak to you all soon.